Welcome, everyone. Hello, and welcome, everyone, to the Game Narrative panel. My name is Emmanuel Contreras, usually go by Manny, and I'm a student at Hunter College. I will be the moderator for this panel. The panelists with me today are Francesca Carletto Leone. She is a game designer at Fulbright. Alexander Horn. He is a narrative director at Impulse Gear. David Keltz. Got it. He is a narrative designer at Awkward Pegasus. And Tori Schaefer. She is a senior narrative and content designer at Proletariat Incorporated. And I guess for our first segment, we will have each panelist give a short overview of your journey and just, quick run through of your history, what you've worked on, and, how you got to where you are right now.
Who would like to kick us off?
Yeah, good question. Do we do alphabetical? I don't need to.
Manny, why don't you just call out people maybe the order of your screen or whatever you want to do?
Okay, sure. Then we can start with David.
Great. So I'm David. I am a freelance narrative designer. I'm based out of Manhattan. Awkward Pegasus is my studio. It's just me. It's my LLC that I run stuff through. So we don't publish my games. I freelance write for other people. And I had kind of a bizarre, at least to me, it's bizarre entry into the industry. So I'll try to go through it quick. But I graduated in 2012 with a degree in musical theater performance. So I learned to sing and dance and act really pretty and be in Book of Mormon on Broadway. It was a lot like Fame, except it was college. So I was hungover all of the time. I graduated and then auditioned for a couple of months afterwards and discovered really quickly that if you want to eat food, you tend to do the same show 8 times a week for many, many years. So you're going to do Beauty and the Beast for the next 20 years. And that very quickly started to not work with me. I'd been writing and actually designing games in RPG Maker as a hobby before then. So I graduated from college after spending too much money on the wrong degree and not knowing anybody, and was like, I'm going to get into games. But the point being, at that time, I had no real education in game design formally. I'd been reading a lot and I didn't know anybody. And I felt a lot of pressure because it was right around, when I graduated, it felt right around the time a lot of 4-year university degree undergraduate programs were popping up. So I felt like I had this brief window where people didn't care that I didn't have a college degree before my competition started to change. And what I did, partially because I knew my resume didn't look good because I had no education, hadn't worked anywhere, is I started speaking about storytelling because I knew I was a good public speaker, I was an actor. And especially while I was gaining experience, I could start by talking about things about storytelling I was very comfortable with, like creating characters. And then as I learned more about things like narrative design and level design, could sort of expand what I talked about. But I wanted to do that because I knew my resume wouldn't impress you. So instead, I sort of shifted my strategy around and instead went, well, I think if I can talk to you for an hour, I can convince you that I'm worth hiring by the time I'm done. And so focused a lot of my strategy on speaking at different places and trying to build a network by giving out a lot of really good information for free and then seeing who wanted to reach out to me afterwards. And it's developed into a really interesting, eclectic career that I really like, but that's how I got started, and that's still how I do most of my work. So as a result, the vast majority of my work has been freelance. I really don't have experience at the studio somewhere. I'll leave it up to the next person.
Tori, if you want to go next.
Yeah, so I had a bit of, I think you'll hear this a lot. Though actually, David, you're not the first person I've heard that got a degree or went to college for musical like theater and stuff that I've heard of narrative design. I guess it makes sense. You want to tell stories, you want to play in stories. I started out as a teacher for English, and then I hated that. So I got a job at ZOS, Cinemax Online Studios, in their QA department. QA is really cool because you don't really need a formal background. You just kind of have to show that you are, you show that you're competent a lot of different ways through their testing or through your resume. There's a lot of varied backgrounds in QA. So I got that job, and then I was reached out by one of the writers on the writing team. That he was like, oh, I heard you had an English background. Do you want to apply for this writing narrative design position for Elder Scrolls Online, which I was QAing for at the time. And I was like, oh yeah, I doubt I'll get it, but sure, I'll do it. And it just was like a lot of like luck that, you know, I had worked within the game engine as a QA tester, so I knew like how to build some stuff within the proprietary engine, and I had a pretty good writing sample, and I just did really well in my interview, so I got the job, which is a really, like, you know, lucky break for sure. So I worked in Elder Scrolls Online for a few years. I wrote, I don't know if anybody here is familiar, I worked like from Morrowind up till the second Dragonhold, the second Elsewhere DLC. And then I moved on to my current gig, which is Proletariat's PvP game Spellbreak. So I am like the only narrative designer on that team. So I went from like, there were 6 narrative design. Well, there was a team of like writing team of 6, and then content designers and systems designers and all these designers. And now I am the only like writer or narrative designer on my team, which is really cool and interesting. And we're kind of working on how to make narrative in a PvP game, which is a very like interesting challenge, I suppose. But yep, that's my story.
All right. Next, Francesca.
Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Francesca, she, her. So I think I guess this would be kind of in other industries considered a more standard route into an industry, but in games, as was already discussed, most folks that I work with do not have specifically game design or game-oriented degrees. So I did a bachelor's specifically in interactive media and with a double major in writing. And then I went on later to get a master's specifically in game design from New York University. And kind of between those, I hopped around in the industry a lot. I was not sure exactly what I wanted to specialize in. I was very much a generalist, trying lots of different things. And I found that a lot of the skills that I came out of my undergraduate with were really centered around communication and more of those soft skills. And I ended up going into more community management and production type work after graduating. So I did that for a while, really enjoyed it. And I also think that if you're someone who is interested in writing or narrative design, a lot of community work is very intentional and thoughtful writing and communication. So I think a lot of those skills translate as well. But yeah, I ended up jumping around a bit and eventually really pivoted my career to focus on design, specifically specializing in narrative-driven content. So I'm currently working at Fulbright as a designer, the development team behind Gone Home and Tacoma, and we're now working on our new game, Open Roads, which is very exciting. And my background has always been in very indie, small, tiny, very intimate development teams. So I'm someone who is also very used to being multidisciplinary. So while I do writing and narrative design, I also hop around a lot. I also jump in and I have done coding. I've done shader and graphics work. I've done all sorts of different things. And that's something that I personally really enjoy. So yeah, ultimately my passion is in more interactive storytelling and emotion first design. So specializing in that content, but working with lots of awesome people who come from different skill sets and backgrounds. And that's why I love working in games.
All right. And finally, Alexander.
Hi, I'm just here for the free food. So I don't know, just wandered in. No, well, I'm Alexander Horn, writer, narrative designer, currently narrative director, but I'm also the only narrative person there, so the narrative department at Impulse Gear. But before that, I worked at Ubisoft on the Division 2 for a couple years at Reflections in the UK. Before that, I was freelance, where I worked with Firaxis, NCSoft, EA, a couple mobile titles. And before that, I was back in the East Coast, in the Baltimore area. I kind of did the rounds of all the studios there. So ZeniMax, Big Huge Games, and Firaxis. I'm happy to be here, and nice to meet all of you.
All right. So next, moving on to the next portion. So it's sort of these are just broad questions for that anyone can kind of tackle it whenever you want. If you don't really have much for it, you don't really have to share if you don't have much to say for it. But so far, the next question we have is your overview of the position. If you had to describe your job to somebody, what exactly do you do? What are your responsibilities? What does a typical day look like? And is there anything that in your job that people wouldn't normally expect when they hear your title? So if anybody kind of wants to jump in first, you're welcome to do so.
So one thing I want to really quickly volunteer about that is I am not a visual person at all. That's why I'm a writer or started out in writing. But it's a visual medium. It's also an oral medium, so I've had to learn a lot about audio and also visual. I can't draw for my life. But I was fortunate that I did learn a little bit of cinematography basics and that kind of film theory stuff. But I actually am really surprised at the amount of presentations and pitches and that kind of work that I do. Like, I got into writing and narrative design because I wanted to do writing and narrative design, not because I wanted to do pitches or presentations in order to do the writing and narrative design. But that part is actually a big part of the job because as narrative, you have to communicate that to the rest of the team, to the artists, to the programmers, to the designers, to everyone. And so being really good at communication, at presenting things, at pitching things, if it's a narrative idea, is actually really valuable. And I would say as valuable in a team environment. If you're working by yourself, then it doesn't matter. But any kind of team, if you're working with more than 5 people, you need to be able to communicate those ideas. So yeah, work on your PowerPoint skills and your graphic design skills, because that stuff is important. Know fonts, know the importance of fonts, like the difference in that, it's actually really important when you're trying to sell an idea, whether it's like you're pitching to Sony or you're, trying to get something in front of your lead. Either one, it's super important.
Yeah, I think to jump off of that, that idea of communication and getting sort of like buy-in on your ideas from the rest of the team is something that is really important when you're working, especially with like a smaller studio, as I have experience doing. But it makes you making sure that you're incorporating feedback and getting that buy-in, and that everyone is clear on kind of the vision that you're presenting from your expertise. Yeah, and I think I also want to say that depending on the structure of the studio and the type of place that you're working, the type of game that you're making, your day-to-day responsibilities will change so drastically depending on who you're working with, right, and what you're making. So before I was working at Fulbright, I was working at a place that was creating contract games for clients. So we were working with organizations like PBS, and we're doing content creation and design for all of these games, but we're doing it, again, with that input, and we need to get buy-in from the client. We need to be able to communicate our ideas effectively and incorporate their feedback. And that's a really important part of the game development process in general. I think any discipline you work in, that sort of iteration loop is extremely, extremely important. So my day-to-day right now, where I'm working as I guess more of like a general designer. So I'm doing level design, I'm doing content implementation, but because of the type of games that Fulbright makes, all of the game design, all of the mechanics, everything is very heavily linked and led by the narrative. So we're working extremely closely with our writer and our creative director to make sure that we're making a coherent experience that is delivering this narrative in a powerful way, the way that we're envisioning. So everything is kind of linked, and you're working cross-disciplinary with lots of different people. But my day-to-day can range from script reviews and feedback to working in ink for implementation of dialogue. And then I'll jump over and do like gray blocking in Unity, right? So it's kind of like all of these things, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, to just kind of jump off of that. So there are things you might be expected to do that you might not like think about because like, oh, I get to create a story and I get to create the lore in the background. I write a lot of cosmetic names, like this is the stylish sentry, yeah, or this is the Wicked Witch or something, you know. I write descriptions for cosmetics. I do also write the dialogue on the quest. I actually implement the quest a lot, which is more my content design role than my narrative design role. I design like what the quest information is going to be each week and like how that all pans out. But yeah, I write a lot of cosmetics themes. I work a lot with like community and media of like, hey, what's the story? Can you like give us these beat by beats? Like, okay, how can we introduce this character? How tall is the character? What's their likes and dislikes? Like, you know, I'm doing a bunch of stuff. When I worked on ESO, we used to write like little blurbs about like somebody interviewing a character that we were going to introduce, or a letter by their like parent or something that, oh, I'm so concerned about so and so, because so we did a lot of that. I've written dialogue for like trailers and stuff too, which is really fun. I've written songs, which is really fun as well. Not like the musics of them, but I've written the lyrics and then had wonderful audio people make those into to music. I've also written steelies, which are the little items that you steal from somebody's pocket that has a cute little description of like, oh, this is like a mural of this god that the Khajiit like worship or whatever. Oh, this is a little doll that like is kind of creepy, you know. So like, you know, you there's a lot of like mundane kind of tasks like that, and there's like really fun stuff. I think dialogue is the thing that you just kind of like jumps out at you, and that's really fun as well. Battle barks for like combat and things like that. And kind of also just like character arcs or things that you really have to consider as a narrative designer. Story arcs, how is the player being presented with this information, and like how best can they retain it while still like implementing gameplay and stuff like that as well. So like a huge range of like, you know, and I think you've already kind of heard that too for narrative design.
Yeah, there was a quote that I remember one of my like mentors early on shared with me that I really liked. And he said that being a narrative designer is a lot like being a lead designer without any of the authority. And that seemed really true for me. But what, especially jumping on that as a freelancer, because I try to let people approach me with a lot of work, what's been interesting is I also get a lot of work from people who are interested in the storytelling potential of games, but aren't necessarily in the game industry. So like I am working on right now like 2 indie roguelikes because Hades. But I'm also doing a like hybrid immersive theater / mobile game. So like Sleep No More meets Pokemon Go, and the company's out of France, and that's cool and that's interesting. But one of the things that I've noticed is when you start taking work with people outside the game industry, your role really changes. Like in this theater game, as an example, I'm doing a lot of system design work, which I'd never done before. Not because I'm a systems designer, but because I'm the only person in the room who's a video game anything. So please figure out how to do this, David. And I've been in a lot of similar positions. I'm also in a position right now where I'm doing a lot of production work for some film producers out in LA who want to start a game studio. So learning how to do a lot of hats, you don't necessarily need to learn how to do anything yourself. Like I can't make a 3D model to save my life, but understanding a little bit of how everyone does all of their jobs, I have found has been very, very important, because a lot of narrative design, like everybody has been saying, is about making sure it's a cohesive picture. So you also have to be able to make sure everybody has what they need from you, and that you're asking people for what you need from the story with multiple a lot of times. You have to know how to speak a lot of different languages.
Yeah, that's, I think, the most salient point. Like, it varies from studio to studio and even department to department. Like, ZeniMax has writers and they have content designers. Big Huge Games had narrative designers that did both. And it's, no 2 studios work with narrative in the same way. So yeah, be flexible, learn everything.
All right, and then we'll move on to our next segment. So the next question is, How often do writers freelance as opposed to working with a company full time? We've heard some people say junior narrative designer positions don't really exist or are considered like unicorn positions, that they're very rare. How true is the statement? And in that vein, how does career advancement work these days, and is it still changing?
So I'll just jump in real quick because I've done a little bit of hiring and I have hired juniors. So they do exist, those positions. The thing is that they are extremely competitive. We hired, Ubisoft does like a internship graduate program is what they call it, but it's basically for people first year out of university. And, we had hundreds and hundreds of applications for that role. It is extremely competitive to find those roles, but they do exist. The thing is with freelance, and what I wanted to say before too, related to this, is that like there isn't really, this is like a game I like to play with other narrative designers and writers, but like there isn't really such a thing as a writer in the games industry, because if you are in the games industry, you're working at a studio, you're a narrative designer. Even if what you do 99% of the day is writing just purely script, like dialogue or cinematic stuff, you still need to know the game. You still need to know everything else, and all of that stuff is narrative design skills. And so the industry has this idea of a writer as someone who comes in and writes all the dialogue, or writes the cinematics and then takes a pass on the dialogue or whatever. A lot of that is freelance work, and there are a lot of people who work as freelance writers that come in, do a pass on the story, and and that's it. In-house positions and studios that have teams of narrative people usually are going to be more narrative focused games, larger games, and those are the positions, like the BioWares, the Bethesdas, the Ubisofts, like those larger studios, larger companies do have entry-level positions. They need to, but yeah, they are extremely competitive.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it is so rare to see writing jobs that are just writing jobs. They're just like, yeah, they're so rare. I almost never see them. And yeah, coming from the indie perspective as well, where you're working often with very small teams and very limited budgets, the more that you are able to do, like if you can do that narrative design and you can do writing, like those are skills that are going to help you mesh and integrate with the rest of the team and work in a more collaborative way. So I do think if you are primarily a writer and looking to work in games, having that skill set and also having that knowledge will help you write specifically for interactive formats, right? Yeah, and I think I have also been in a position where I've hired junior designers who have been responsible for content and narrative, amongst other things. And the thing that I also really look for is juniors or entry-level folks who are finishing projects to a good level of polish. Like being able to bring something over the finish line, I think, is what will make you stand out as a more entry-level candidate. So as much as I love game jams, and I love seeing people do game jams as a way to get their foot in the door, seeing a candidate who maybe takes a game jam project and keeps working on it and polishing and iterating and using their narrative design skills and showcasing their writing in a really great interactive format, that's something that I really look for. And I also wanted to mention that, so I also work with an organization called Code Coven, where we teach game development and coding classes online for people of marginalized genders. And we have a lot of people who come into our programs from writing backgrounds and then pick up more of those design and a little bit of coding skill sets so that you're able to jump into an engine and build out your ideas and your content. And while those narrative and writing junior positions are very, very rare, we do see a lot of our alumni being able to find those. It just, I think, does take a lot of time and patience, and building up a community and a network of folks who appreciate and like your work is really, really important.
All right. Sorry about that. Voice is sore. So we're going to move actually into Q&A because I've noticed that we're actually getting a lot of questions from the audience. So for this segment, if possible, just like maybe one of you guys could tackle the questions each, or unless you have something else to add, we can get through them. So the first question we have is, what would you guys say draws the line between simply being a writer and a full-on narrative designer? And how much of what you write is solo work and how much is a team effort?
I'll say if you are given a gameplay design and you have no input into it, and you say this is like what the input that the gameplay design is, and you just have to write like whatever we tell you to write, then you're just a writer, right? If you're like, say, if you like have like these are two characters, they're gonna have back and forth, write us a script. Like, don't say like what actions they take. Don't tell us like if they move or if you are not in any way inputting into gameplay, then you're just a writer. If you have any say on gameplay, if you say like, oh, let's have the character instead of fighting this monster, then talking to this person and then fighting the boss, let's do it talk, then fight, and then the boss right after. If you have any input into that, you're narrative designing. In my, I don't think that's just my opinion. I think that's true. You're designing the narrative experience that the player is going to go through. And honestly, like a lot of narrative designers do also write. That's like, it's just something that a lot of game companies pair together. But there are roles that are just writing the scripts. Literally, I think like some of the game positions are called script writer because you're not really working within the engine. And then there are just pure narrative designs where somebody else will write all the words for you, but you get to decide how those words come out within the design. Those things are separate, but a lot of times they are also together.
Yeah, it's a spectrum, right? It's like game design over here, freelance writer that never even knows what the game looks like, that only edits, that does an editing pass of the words over here, and everyone kind of falls in between. Freelancers are usually on that side, right? So.
I'll also add to that, for what it's worth, it depends on who you work for. Like I've noticed the larger the company, the more likely I am to be purely a contract writer. I don't want to hear your opinion about design. And the smaller the team is, the more I've really been encouraged to take a hand in the system. So as a freelancer and only a freelancer, that's been my experience. The bigger the studio, the more we really just want you to write stuff and make content.
All right. So next question we have which is one that I was personally very curious about, is what are ways to make sure that a narrative isn't being forced, so that the player is excited to see what happens next rather than groaning whenever a cutscene comes up?
I want to hear what Francesca has to say about that, because I think
making faces because that's such a big question. I think there's no way to answer that really succinctly, because I think when I was learning, like, how do you make compelling characters? How do you make compelling narrative arcs? I really recommend, honestly, like going back into like the history and doing some literature and some reading on film and on theater also. Like looking at the history of storytelling and how you actually make compelling narrative arcs. But I think also the truth is, as being someone who has written games, people are always going to skip cutscenes. I feel like I will do my darndest, but there are some people who, aren't playing the game for the narrative, and I think that's okay. And then some people are playing the game exclusively for the narrative, which tends to be me. And how I, get motivated to play games, I'm really narrative and like character driven, right, as a player. But I'm sorry, I made some faces because I was just like, I also want to know the answer to this question. I'm like looking for the answer.
The answer is do what Gone Home did, because that game is masterful. It's so good. It's really, that's an awesome narrative game. I love it.
I unfortunately cannot take credit, but a large part of why I work at Fulbright is because I played that game and was so, compelled by the narrative. And I think for me, a big part of that is because a game like that, where narrative is the focus and the primary motivator, the mechanics and the world and everything is built around that narrative, which unfortunately is not the case in a lot of games. As Tori mentioned, sometimes they're like, here's the game, please write us a narrative, because we want to slap that in there. So I think when there is more of a union, right, between the narrative and the story that you're telling and the actual actions and mechanics that the player is performing, that's when you get a really like awesome, powerful narrative experience, in my opinion. But I would love to hear what everyone else has to say.
Yeah, I think that for like bigger games, again, there are narrative games that are just like that's their bread and butter. But for like bigger games, like yeah, people might skip my cutscenes. Some don't. It's like why do you put a fishing mini game in a game? Because maybe only 2% of your players are gonna play that fishing mini game, but they're gonna love the heck out of that fishing mini game. So you put it in because like you want to put in little odds and pieces for everybody. Some people are just gonna play the PvP portion. Some people are just gonna want to do combat. Some people aren't even going to care about the combat because they just want cute armor and they want to like role play and maybe they'll write fan fiction or maybe they'll draw. It's just you're catering to a lot of different people with like bigger games, like an MMO especially. And I'm narrative designing. I'm catering to only a few people. That's okay. My other coworkers are also catering to only a few people. And you just put those pieces together into something that people really enjoy.
Yeah, I know. For me, my experience working with a lot of smaller teams is about expanding the story outside of the realm of just writing into sort of all of the different elements of the game so that everybody has access to them. So you're telling stories through the environment art and also the audio and the music and also the gameplay itself and cutscenes, with the idea that not only is there then something for everyone, but you can put multiple things in multiple places. Like I remember when I was first learning to do narrative design myself, I played through BioShock looking at the levels specifically and where everything was placed. And one of the things that I noticed is they have almost two types of storytelling in every room. They either have some writing or some sort of a gameplay scenario that's pre-programmed where you walk in on enemies and they're doing something narrative before the fight starts. They have multiple forms of storytelling and they use those multiple forms of storytelling to generate questions that people want to have the answers to. So even the players who aren't super into cutscenes and are going to skip most of your cutscenes, you can still present questions that are going to make them curious about what's happening through elements of the game that aren't just the words. And so making sure that all of those things are attended to and that all of those different types of players have access into the story. There are always going to be people, just like Francesca was saying, who don't care, who are just going to skip. And you win as many of them as you can, and that's it. But I find that trying to talk to them in a lot of different ways helps win as many of them as I can.
That's I think key, right? The diversity. You need contrast space, right? That's a necessary but not sufficient requirement for good storytelling, right? Because that's basic comedy and tragedy. If everything is comedy, then nothing is comedy, right? And everything's tragedy, nothing's tragedy. It's those moments of pathos in comedy, like Charlie Chaplin, is a perfect example of that, where it's all funny, and then for one moment, oh, this is a really sad scene, but it's a really powerful scene. And similarly, in a drama, or something that's really tragic, those little moments of levity could really stand out and give a relief to the audience. So you have to have that contrast space and that difference, and doing it in different ways through environmental storytelling and cutscenes and dialogue and everything else is one way to ensure you get that contrast space.
All right. So our next question is, how do you land a first narrative design gig? What kind of writing sample might I have to prepare? What kind of questions might I have to answer?
So I would say that most common one I've seen is a script. I have literally pulled Twitter about this. A common TV or movie script is very popular to give out. It's just easy to read. People are really familiar with it. Totally recommend doing that. If you have a script, sometimes they will ask you to write something in the game. It's more of a writing test that you might get into later. Usually they don't want you to send anything that is the game because of legal reasons. I would say try to do it within the same genre as the game that you're writing for. So if it's fantasy, my writing sample for Elder Scrolls Online, for example, I literally wrote a scene that could be in the game. I guess I was in QA, so it didn't really matter, right? So I wrote a scene between a guy and he's really nervous about oh my poor daughter. He's a Khajiit. They're cat people. He's like, my poor daughter is kidnapped. I'm so worried. And then you're like, oh, like what? And you find out at the end of the like little script that it's a cat. Like it's literally his cat, which is funny because they actually do have Khajiit that look like cats that can talk called Alfiq, but that's like besides the point. And the people like really enjoyed it because they're like, oh, I could see this like going into our game. But you can just do that by writing within the same genre, like writing a fantastical story for a fantasy series or something like that. I'd also say creating a portfolio and a website is really important. It's really nice to just go over and to see like interactive videos, to play whatever you have on Twine is really good. I have videos on my website of all the stuff I worked, not all of it, but like a lot of stuff I worked on. I have like song videos and like things. So just having like a multimedia portfolio that's really dedicated towards like, you know, whatever you're applying for is really good as well. And I could say a lot of things about resumes. So I'm not even going to get started on that, but you know, that's like a whole talk within itself, just like how to get a game design resume. Actually, I should pitch that talk sometime because that would be really interesting, just like go through.
All right. So unfortunately, since we're running out of time, we will have to move probably to the next question. So we'll probably just do like one person per question. So for next one, we have, obviously narratives are a thing in conventional media too. As pros who think a lot about interactive and game narratives, who are the conventional story tellers that excite you the most?
I want to say that I think wrestling storylines are the Shakespeare of our era. The reason why Shakespeare is the greatest of all time is not because of the soliloquies and the amazing structures and the dramas. It's because he was able to do what he did for mass audience, for popular audience. He was appealing to both highbrow and lowbrow at the same time. And that's amazingly difficult to do. And inventing a language while you're doing it is also, you know, that's just impressive. But I think that kind of stuff, like I watch a lot of TikTok, and some of the stuff on there is brilliant, like narratively brilliant. And that's what I look to is stuff that has both mass appeal, but also doing something really clever.
All right. So next we actually have a specific question for Tori. Sorry if I mispronounced the title. It's Manor of Moss was great, and I love the writing. What was it like working on that quest? I'm very curious about including diverse narratives in AAA. How did it happen?
I'm so excited. Okay, I'll just be real quick about this. Manor of Masks is a storyline which features the very first transgender woman in all of Elder Scrolls history. I was like the writer on that quest. Super proud of it. It actually got us the very first video game, outstanding video games with LGBTQ plus content with the GLAAD Awards. So we actually got a GLAAD Award for that quest, which is really cool and honorable. Yeah, I would say that it was an honor. When I write diverse content, I don't try to make it something that's consumable for everybody. I try to make it so that it's something that the person who is being represented is the person who's going to enjoy it and is going to get something out of it. So I wrote Alchemy, who's the transgender woman within the quest, for the transgender community, and I've gotten a lot of love and comments about that. I'm sorry, I'm so excited because I just love talking about the subject. I would say do your research. I actually have a whole GDC talk on writing for diversity for LGBTQ plus. I'll put that in the comments, but I'll say like do your research, try to get sensitivity readers if you can to people from that community, hire people if you can, and if you can't hire people, like try to reach out to those communities and be like, here's a free key code if you like do this, or like I'll put you as a thank you on the like, you know, the credits and stuff like that. There's a lot of ways you can do that. So I'm gonna just link my talk because I gave a whole other talk about this. But thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the quest.
All right. Next we have, what alternatives do you seek out during the time when you just can't find Orlando's narrative designer jobs? I think I'll send this question to David.
Ooh. So what I would say actually, and again, keep in mind, I have from my perspective, bizarre career, but I still to this day don't look good on paper. Like still to this day, I don't send my resume places. I don't apply for things. So I feel a little bit like a fish out of water in this conversation. But part of that is because where I've really found I'm most successful in getting work is in that ecosystem that exists within studios and between designers before there's a job opening. So in my perspective is the best thing that you can do is if you can't find a narrative design job is to not necessarily throw your resume everywhere you possibly can if that's not the road that's leading to doors for you, and instead focus on meeting people and finding a community that can give you the work that you want, and then just being a good person there. Like one of the things that I know I learned being an actor is success is all being in the right place at the right time. And that sounds really depressing because none of us know what the right time is, but you do get to control the right place and eventually the right time will come around. So if you can find where the people you want to work with are, and if you can try to give without expecting much in return to that community and to prove that you're someone who wants to make the pie bigger for everyone in that place, and don't worry about what people can give you back when you're meeting them and asking favors from you. That's the best way to grow a healthy long-term career. And ultimately, like from my perspective as a freelancer, if I applied for 100 things and got one of them, that's great. But in 4 months, I'm back at square one, exactly where I was. And none of the people who I sent my resume to remembered me because my resume doesn't look very good. Whereas getting to meet people in person and show that you're capable and competent in person before there is a job opening is what I think yields rewards in an environment that is already competitive. If you're in a position like me, by the time there's 100 people competing for the gig, you've already lost. So try to know the right people before they need you. And then when they need you, they'll know that they like you and trust you.
All right, thank you. So the next question I will point towards Alexander. Is it possible to find a position as a narrative designer without being an expert in coding? Please give me that answer because I have been struggling to find that answer.
So yeah, definitely. My degree was in English, and I taught myself everything I needed to know about coding, and I can make my own little games in Unity and stuff. You do have to know. You have to be familiar with it, like David was saying. You have to know some of someone was saying it. Can't remember who, but you have to be familiar with coding, but you don't have to know how to code. I'm a little dangerous with Lua, but like, I know enough to know that I'm dangerous. That's it. Excel is important. Like you really should know how Excel flew. Like definitely, like get really good with Excel. If that's your only technical skill, then great. But if you don't ever want to get your hands dirty, you're probably looking at the freelance route. You're probably looking at the outside writer coming in, doing a copy pass, that kind of thing. And then you don't really have as much ownership of the game. You don't have as much input. It's not worse, it's different. So yeah.
All right. I guess the next question we can go towards Francesca. Are there any standard kinds of deliverables or documents you create and present as a narrative designer? So when proposing a story or giving it to whoever's in charge, what are the types of documents you would make for that?
Yeah, I might actually have to pass this one because I am not primarily a narrative designer. So while I generate documents and do a lot of that work occasionally, it's not actually in my day-to-day. So I would actually love to pass this one to someone, maybe Alexander, because you were talking about getting buy-in from the team and doing those presentations.
Sure, I'll jump in. Oh, so much documentation. Yeah, to go back, like graphic design, basics, Word is your friend, but PowerPoint is even better, right? Yeah, learning graphs and what's it called? Basically like infographic kind of stuff, that kind of communication, graphical, whatever it's called. That stuff is invaluable. And yeah, there's so much that pre-production, right? It's all documentation. That's all it is for narrative design. You're doing zone docs, character docs, themes. You're doing, faction docs. You're doing, and then you're supporting narrative systems. Like here's what the collectibles are going to be. Here's what the nemesis or the ally or companions. Like that's all documentation. So I have a ton of templates that I go back to that I've stolen from every company I've worked at, and that's really valuable. Yeah, just start trying to find those templates and stick to them.
All right, guys. So with that, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Trust me, guys, I'm a narrative person. I wish this could go on forever. But I guess this is the conclusion to our panel. I want to thank all of you for being here, especially our panelists. You guys were amazing. I loved getting to talk to all of you. And I hope that the audience got a great show. You guys asked a lot of amazing questions, and we got a lot of information here. For those of you who wish to learn more, you guys can find their social medias or some of the links that were posted here. And I hope you guys will not only have a great day and a great weekend, but enjoy the rest of Waffle Games. And hope you guys all have a great time.